Brian and Jenny are afraid of losing the inn they own right before their wedding. They are the adorable couple everyone loves, but financial issues threaten to ruin their big day. Brian wakes up to find his fiancée, Jenny, making the most delicious pumpkin pancakes. She's an amazing baker and is excited about becoming a fall bride. She loves this time of the year. The wedding is just 2 months away, and they still have a lot to do. They're planning everything and need to decide the flowers and cake. They own Emily's Country Inn together. Brian starts taking calls from guests. Every time someone makes a reservation, they mention the review in Susan's travel blog. Jenny agrees with the review and thinks people always leave their inn happier. Brian feels if they get overbooked, he can stay at Tommy's and Jenny can rent out his room. Jenny likes the idea for extra cash because the wedding is too expensive. He feels it's because Jenny has invited everyone in town, but she just wants to share her joy with others. Brian calls out to the wandering goats, Gabby and Lucy, outside their inn. He even asks Ricky to behave, but Jenny thinks he's talking to them like they're dogs. Jenny has narrowed down some wedding invitations and wants him to choose one. He likes all of them, so he asks Gabby for her expert advice. Brian thinks they should get married under the huge tree. In her fantasy wedding, Jenny always imagined a gazebo. He decides to build her one, but jokes about not knowing how sturdy or symmetrical it will be. He knows she loves him for his toolbox too, and she decides to put that in her vows. He seems sure he wants to make her his bride at that spot. Brian can't believe Jenny has also invited the mailman. Jenny doesn't want him to feel left out when he delivers the invitations. Besides, she thinks he's a nice man. Brian gets a call from his brother, Harry, who has finally bought a condo for himself. The questions they asked about him being single with no pets made him sound lonely. He asks Brian to feel lucky he inherited the inn and everything with it. Brian informs Jenny about Harry's condo. It has made him think about his MBA degree from Wharton. He feels like he's wasting it just on innkeeping and wants to do something more. He wants to build a company, Jenny's Home Baked, so he can sell her baked goods. Jenny thinks it's a great idea, and he decides to start making calls. Jenny loves all the wedding dresses she's trying on. Her maid of honor, Casey, has been to so many weddings as a bridesmaid that she has lost count. Jenny is sure her day will come soon. When Jenny feels she has found the perfect dress, Casey hands over her card to the shopkeeper. Jenny is afraid to ask the price, but Casey insists she wants this to be a wedding present from her. Jenny finds Meg looking around and asks if she wants a room at the inn. Meg is more interested in if Jenny owns the inn. Jenny explains that she owns it her fiancé, who is trying to build a gazebo for their wedding. Meg agrees to take a room, but feels scared of the goats. Jenny explains the house is 100 years old, but they have remodeled a lot. They each inherited half the house from Emily, who was the original owner. Jenny has never met Emily, but she left the house to her mother's Aunt Madge and the caretaker of the property. She and Brian have inherited it from them, and she is grateful. Jenny feels the place will make her fall in love with nature, but Meg is more curious about how big the property is. She shows Meg to her room and asks her to get in touch if she needs something. Tommy thinks building a gazebo is ambitious and teases Brian about his carpentry. Brian asks him to be his best man because they have known each other for a long time. Tommy knows he can help build the gazebo and wants Brian to have it as his wedding present. He feels like he owes Brian, since he met Susan while she was staying at the inn. Brian thanks Susan for the blog, because of which they keep getting regular customers. Susan thinks the inn casts a romantic spell because it got her closer to Tommy. As Jenny and Brian carry the wood, she informs him about their new guest. She feels weird because Meg asked too many questions. Brian feels she could be looking for her own B&B and must be checking out competition. Brian has done research on selling baked goods and thinks they need another coffee shop franchise. They discuss about adding a dining tomb to the inn after the wedding, which could become a little restaurant. She seems nervous about asking him about one more thing. They don't have much family at the wedding because her parents are gone and she doesn't have anyone else. But Brian's dad is still around and she wants him to be there. Brian hasn't spoken to him in 2 years. After his dad, Gordon, remarried, Brian had issues with his stepmother, Helen. He has also heard from the papers that they're getting a divorce. Jenny feels that's a better reason to reach out. Brian knows his dad only cares about stocks and bonds, but Jenny asks him to give him another chance. Meg starts clicking photos of the room and other areas of the inn. Jenny brings a Danish for Vern and asks him to give her away at the wedding. He's very touched and is thinking about buying a new suit. Brian finally calls Gordon and claims he feels bad for what happened with Helen. Gordon thinks that's generous, considering he never liked Helen. Brian clarifies that he is in Bucks County. He explains how he inherited a house, fell in love, and moved in. Gordon doesn't approve of him leaving Wall Street. Brian was already expecting this reaction, but he informs him that he's getting married. Gordon teases him about being an innkeeper, but Brian admits he enjoys it with Jenny. He claims she's the best thing that happened to him. Gordon admits he misses him and agrees to come to the wedding. Brian informs Jenny about the call and is glad his dad is coming. Meg interrupts them and informs Jenny that she is her second cousin. Once removed, she's entitled to an equal share of the estate, and Brian knows she's trying to contest Emily's will. She explains that the will was written in 1965 and was left to her caretaker and her cousin, Madge. This cousin is Jenny's mother's aunt, and Meg is related to her from her father's side. She understands that Brian is descended from the caretaker's side. Meg explains that she works for an accounting firm in Chicago. She has been away for work a lot in Tokyo and received the lawyer's letter in her Chicago address later. After that, she decided to come to the inn. She thinks she supersedes Jenny in the will, but she understands they have a valid claim because they have improved the property. Meg agrees to settle for 1/3 of the estate. She asks them to consult their lawyer while she does some research to assess the property's value. She offers to let them buy her out, or they can sell it. Jenny discusses her confusion with Casey. While she's happy to find a relative, she's upset about the inn and excited about the wedding at the same time. She's afraid they will have to sell it if they can't buy Meg out. She even considers moving up the wedding date. Brian discusses this situation with Tommy and doesn't want Jenny to know he's worried. They have taken a second mortgage out on the house for the remodeling, so he knows they can't afford to buy Meg out. Tommy suggests Susan writing another review, but Brian knows he needs to figure something out. Meg meets Andy to ask about the value of local properties like the inn. Andy claims it's not for sale, and the owners are his friends. Meg clarifies that she owns part of that property. He asks to show her other options, but she specifically asks for the square footage and selling price. Andy thinks you can't put a price on how people feel when they stay at the inn, but Meg is determined to gather information and asks him to mail her the details. Meg feels awkward before coming in the house, but Jenny makes her feel comfortable. Since she's family, Jenny wants to know more about her. She learns that Meg was born and raised in Chicago by her mother after her parents got divorced. Jenny was raised by her mother too, after her father passed away. Jenny is Meg's only known relative too. She was engaged, and it didn't work out. After that, she found out about the house. The same thing happened to Jenny when she broke up with her previous boyfriend. That's when she found out she inherited the place. Meg's boss asks her to do more work, and she's frustrated since she never gets credit. Jenny and Brian come out to shop for flowers. It's clear he doesn't know anything about them. The florist makes some suggestions and predicts a happy marriage. Jenny invites her to the wedding too, and Brian jokes about checking if anyone else also wants to come. Meg can't delay her work longer, so she's leaving for Chicago. She has calculated the value of the property and knows her share is worth $126,000. She claims she tried to be fair and accurate. She asks them to get back to her when they hear from their lawyer. She compliments Jenny's food, but she's not good with goodbyes. Jenny and Brian are headed to the lawyer's office, where they first met each other. The lawyer has reviewed all the documents and can confirm Meg's authenticity. He explains the will is so old that it was tough to trace all the beneficiaries. Many letters and calls were sent out, but Jenny and Brian were the only two who responded. He doesn't recommend going to court with this because it will cost more than what they owe Meg. He advises them to pay her off, but the only way to do that is if they sell the property. Brian remembers how they initially wanted to sell the house. Now, he would do anything to keep it. Brian convinces people to try out Jenny's samples. They have been chasing offers, but he doesn't think that's enough. He knows they need a big fish and considers selling her goods to a huge chain like Township Foods. Jenny knows that would be perfect and is sure he will get an appointment with them. They leave to meet the baker Jenny has chosen for her cake. She asks Brian to let her take the lead with the frosting and filling. When the baker shows them samples, Jenny gives him very specific instructions about what she wants. He has been baking wedding cakes for years, and no one has been that specific. He's sure he will remember them, so Jenny invites him to the wedding too. As Tommy helps Brian with the gazebo, he gets a call from a first-time vendor for delivering Jenny's goods. Jenny also just spoke to the mailman's wife, Nancy. Her brother works for Township Foods, so they have an appointment. Jenny is excited things are working out. She prepares a lot of samples, but Casey feels like she's taking on a lot of work. Jenny thinks there's a lot at stake, but Casey assures her it will work out. Jenny and Brian prepare for their pitch and know the samples will sell themselves. They arrive at the office to meet Janet, but learn that her flight got delayed. She's still the corporate headquarters in Denver. Her assistant loves how good Jenna's baked good look. Brian asks her to forward their pitch to Janet, and the assistant asks them to leave the samples with her. Jenny doesn't know if this will work out. She still gets ready for the bridal shower Alice is throwing for her. The wedding is only 3 weeks away, and Jenny feels grateful for the work Alice did. Susan asks about the inn, and Jenny thanks her for helping with the blog. Brian turns up at the party without the intention of crashing it. He can't wait to give the good news in person to Jenny. The regional VP and the entire staff loved Jenny's samples. They already have a huge order from Township Foods. If they do well, they can even get a long-term contract. Things finally seem to be looking up, and they feel like they can save the inn. Harry calls Brian and offers to help with growing Jenny's company. He has been thinking about asking Casey as his date for the wedding. They have flirted a little, so Brian agrees to give her number to him. Brian is struggling with the gazebo when Tommy and his nephew, Frank, come to help him. Frank recently got laid off because not many people need a gazebo. Brian hires him because he and Jenny are working full-time. They also need to deliver her baked goods to all the vendors. Jenny happily starts making her first huge batch for Township Foods. Casey informs her about Harry asking her out. She didn't hesitate before agreeing because she really likes him. Jenny thinks that matters the most in a relationship. She also feels like it's fate because Jenny met Casey and Vern because of the inn, and Casey met Harry through Brian. She hopes it works out for them, especially because they're going to meet again at Emily's magical inn. Brian is preparing breakfast the next morning to take some load off Jenny. He makes them hard like a frisbee, so Jenny offers to take over. Jenny loads her items into Frank's van, and he promises to call when he delivers them. Jenny feels like they can finally relax for a while and discuss the wedding together. Brian seems distracted because Frank hasn't called yet. Frank starts freaking out when smoke comes out of his van. He tries to fix it, but it's in a bad condition. Frank somehow finds signal and calls Brian to let him know the van broke down. Brian promises to fix this for Jenny by calling Township Foods. The receptionist feels they missed a huge chance by not delivering the goods on time. He tries to make her reconsider, but informs Jenny that they lost the account. It seems very hard to build a company, but Jenny still thinks they can recover from this. He doesn't care for her optimism because they're getting married soon and might not have a home. Brian suggests postponing the wedding so they can use the money to pay Meg off. Jenny reminds him that invitations have been sent, and all the vendors have already taken the deposits. Apart from that, they both know they can't wait to marry each other. Brian is tending to goats when Gordon calls him again. He's in the city the next day and wants to have lunch with Brian and Jenny. Gordon already likes Jenny from the first meeting. She's just happy he's coming to the wedding. He is very curious to see the inn they have inherited. Gordon wants to be honest and asks Jenny what problem she has with New York. He doesn't want Brian to choose between a stable career in the city and the woman he wants to marry. He honestly feels an innkeeper's job can't be fulfilling, but he apologizes for meddling. Brian thinks that was him on his best behavior and makes up with him. Brian gets a call from Meg, who asks if they have decided something. She can't wait longer, but he explains it's taking time to expand Jenny's company. Meg knows it can take years to start a business, but she's arriving at the inn that weekend and wants to resolve the issue. Jenny asks Brian to take a break from the gazebo. They sit down to discuss what they will tell Meg. Brian has been thinking about taking a loan from his dad, but he feels money could be tight because of the divorce. Even Harry has money, but he just bought a condo. Jenny assures him they will figure it out. Brian jokes about breeding goats for money or becoming a stand-up comedian. Jenny thanks him for making her laugh. They know they can find a solution when they have each other. Meg offers to let them have her third of the goats as a wedding present. She asks them to decide about the house soon. She suggests selling it because it's the practical solution. Jenny loves that the house is not practical, which is why it's important to her. The singing sink and creaking stairs all have beautiful memories. Brian remembers the time he and Jenny split the house in half. They fell in love after that. But Meg still refuses to see any romance in that place. Brian meets Tommy to talk to him as a friend. He knows they will have to sell the house, so Tommy offers to help. Brian thinks he's helping enough just by being there. Vern is excited about how good he looks in his new suit. He can see Jenny is upset, and she explains she's worried about selling the house. Vern knows Emily would have wanted her to keep it. Since Andy is helping sell the house, Meg makes him understand how the value is not increasing because the house is so old. She likes being an accountant because numbers are more predictable than people. They find Jenny, who is glad a friend like Andy is in charge of selling the house. Meg assures her it won't sell immediately. When Andy discusses the wedding, Jenny claims Meg has to be there since she's family. She hopes Andy can make it too. Andy thinks Jenny is too sweet. As he puts up the for sale sign, Jenny and Brian discuss how much they love everything about the house. Jenny hopes whoever buys the inn knows they're lucky. Brian just hopes they won't tear it down. He knows a developer won't appreciate the beauty of the place like them. They decide to focus on the good memories and remember when it rained in their rooms. They also remember his proposal and when Gabby gave birth to the kids. Meg finally starts warming up to the goats and overhears Brian mentioning to customers that the inn is closing. Jenny is making lunch and asks if she can bring Meg a sandwich to her room. Meg doesn't understand why Jenny is so nice to her. Brian explains that nothing can change Jenny's nature, which is why he loves her. Meg is not used to trusting people, and Brian wasn't either till he met Jenny. Meg envies them and heads straight to her room. Meg wonders why Jenny is so fond of a singing sink. Jenny explains that they couldn't afford a plumber when they just moved in. Brian did his best to fix it, and she remembers how proud he was. Jenny wants to watch every sunset with Brian till they have the inn. Brian suggests getting another place big enough for the goats and the gazebo. Jenny wants the wedding to be their big send-off to celebrate everything Emily gave them. Jenny brings hot apple cider for Meg while she's working. It's from the apple tree behind the barn, and she wants Meg to understand why she loves this place. When Jenny first moved in, she found a card from Lester, who was Vern's brother. Lester and Emily were in love, but he perished in the war. She lived her life alone after that. She wants Meg to know this story because Emily is the common connection between them. Meg shares that she went all out with a dress and guest list after her engagement. She hasn't been lucky in love and doesn't like to talk about herself. Jenny is glad she still opened up to her. Brian informs Jenny that Gordon is coming to stay at the house. With him and Meg around, he is wondering if they can elope. But nothing can stop their excitement about getting married to each other. Gordon thinks his house is charming, even if he imagined it to be bigger. He jokes about feeding the for sale sign to his goats. Jenny brings towels and a blanket for Gordon and asks him to let her know if he needs anything. He wants her perspective and wonders if Brian mentions him. Jenny knows Brian misses him from the time he was a kid. Gordon knows he always put his work first and lost touch with him after his mother remarried and they moved away. He wants to get to know him better. Jenny asks Brian if his dad eats what she's making for breakfast. He feels like this is something a son should know, but he has no idea. Gordon loves Jenny's eggs Benedict and thinks her talents are wasted in a B&B. Brian shares that they're thinking of expanding to dinner too, and they're even considering opening a restaurant. He thinks there will be enough time with the restaurant because Jenny's home baked is already working well. He realizes he needs to feed the goats and asks Gordon to join him. Meg has noticed how hard Jenny is trying to make everyone her family. She's not used to people being aware of her and doesn't know what to make of Jenny. Gordon clarifies that he came just for the wedding, but his meddling nature is making him wonder the appeal of this kind of life. Brian admits that he pretended to be interested in stocks as a kid to bond with him, but he realized it's not who he is. Gordon thinks they have things in common like sports, but they both know they're horrible at it. Their sense of humor is also common. Brian is always trying to be funny because it reminds him of Gordon. His plan is to grow Jenny's business and open a restaurant once the inn gets sold. He explains how important it is to be true to himself in his work. Gordon starts sneezing, and Brian realizes he must be allergic to goats. Brian tries to make Gordon play with the goats, but he maintains his distance. Meg finally admits the scenery will be a huge attraction for out-of-towners. She seems different and less uptight to Andy, and she knows it's because she took time off from work. Andy thinks there's something special about the inn, but she just feels like he's trying to convince her to keep it. He thinks she can think the worst of people, but it's less lonely if she doesn't. Jenny doesn't seem happy while trying on the dress. Brian told her they might have a buyer for the house. Casey knows it's her job as the maid of honor to keep her in high spirits. Jenny starts crying but admits she doesn't want to let anything ruin her happiest day. She feels lucky to have Brian and knows they can work it out. Brian is nervous because Andy is showing the house to someone. He looks like a developer who might want to tear it down. As Andy shows him around, he hears the singing sink where Meg is doing the dishes. The prospective buyer thinks it will need a lot of plumbing and is considering rebuilding it. Andy sadly informs Brian that they just got an offer on the house. All the friends gather to collect funds so Brian and Jenny can keep the inn. Alice loves them, so she contributes first, because she can't let them lose the place. Susan remembers how she met Tommy at the inn and contributes too. Vern also wants to make sure the inn doesn't close on his watch. Casey knows Jenny would always be there for her and wants to save the inn because she got a date through it. Andy is also happy to lose his commission and puts more in the box. Brian is talking to someone when he notices everyone coming in. They ask for Jenny, so he finds her upstairs and asks her to take a look. Tommy hands them the check from all of them. He claims it's in return for everything Jenny and Brian have done for them. They have collected $32,000 as the first down payment on what they owe. This makes Meg tear up, and she realizes she doesn't want to be the bad guy. She wants Jenny and Brian to keep the house and knows they will pay her back. Jenny and Brian are overwhelmed with what they all did, and Gordon finally understands the appeal of his place. Brian asks Gordon to fix his tie before the wedding. They both finally feel like father and son, and he blesses him for an amazing marriage. Meg thinks Jenny's dress is perfect and gives her earrings for her something borrowed in blue. They belong to her grandmother, who got them as a gift from a cousin. They assume it might be Emily's. Being at the inn has made Meg change her perspective, and she probably wants to open her firm in that town. Jenny always thought she was alone, but is glad she will have family nearby. Casey comes to bring Jenny to the wedding, and Vern walks her down the aisle. Vern hands her over, and the priest performs a beautiful ceremony for them. Brian thinks of Jenny as his North Star and believes in her the most. Brian is the love Jenny always wanted to find and thinks he's her destiny and happiness. They exchange rings and get ready to start a new chapter in their lives. For his best man toast, Tommy explains how Brian and Jenny brought the house to life, and everyone is grateful to them. They toast to the happy couple and Emily, who must be happy with this union. After cutting the cake, they take on the dance floor where Meg also dances with Andy, and Casey dances with Harry.